Hey, this is attorney Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein, and today we're going to talk about whether your one-owner business should be an LLC or a sole proprietorship. Looking at LLCs versus sole proprietorships for one-owner businesses here in the United States, one issue to consider is that if you just start a business as one person, you're automatically a sole proprietorship. But you have the option to consider forming a limited liability company or an LLC. There are many videos and articles online that say everybody should be an LLC, but that's not the truth. For many very tiny businesses, one-owner businesses, starting out as a sole proprietorship is the most appropriate way to begin, but not in every situation. So what are the pluses and minuses of the default, a sole proprietorship? Well, first, it's the default. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to pay fees to anybody. You don't have to hire an attorney. You don't have to file forms with some government. You just exist automatically as a sole proprietorship. The other advantage is that you can have the same tax status as an LLC anyway. So if having the tax status as a pass-through entity where you just declare your taxes to the IRS on your Schedule C, if that's what you're planning to do anyway, if that's what is the most appropriate thing for you, it doesn't actually matter from a tax perspective if you're doing an LLC or sole proprietorship. Now, for a sole proprietorship, you actually still may need to file some forms. You may need a business license or other permits. You may need to file a DBA, a doing business as registration or trade name registration with your state or your county or some other agency. The big downside of a sole proprietorship is that you, as a human person, are personally liable financially for whatever happens in the business. So what does that mean? That means that if your business goes bankrupt, if it owes a bunch of debts to people, if it gets sued because someone doesn't like what you did, you're personally liable for that. So they can come after your personal assets. Now, if you have no personal assets, maybe you don't care. But if you have a house, if you have money that you received as an inheritance, if your spouse has money, all those things can be attachable to some kind of a lawsuit or debt collection. Sometimes they can also even go after your future earnings. So you get a big debt settlement against you, then you're going to have to keep paying that even after the business is gone. So forming an LLC or limited liability company is something that any one-owner business in the United States can do. You can do it in every single state, all 50 states in the United States. Now, unlike a sole proprietorship, it costs money to form an LLC. If you do it yourself and you file directly for the LLC on the website or filling out whatever forms and filing by mail with your state, then the fees are lower than if you use a filing service or if you hire an attorney to do it for you. But you still have to pay the state's fees. It could be $75, it could be hundreds of dollars, but you're gonna have some amount of money. You also may need to do publishing requirements in some states, which can be hundreds and hundreds of dollars. There are a lot of fees you may not have thought about. You also may have some annual fees in some particular states. It could be annual filing requirements that are like a $800 fee, like as in California. It could be $300. It could just be $125, but there's probably going to be some kind of annual obligation for filing and updating them on the state on your name and address and changes and things of that nature, and also just paying them more money. Another issue with an LLC is you have to honor the corporate formalities for it to be a legit LLC. That means it needs a separate bank account. It needs a separate PayPal if you use PayPal. It needs to have its own bookkeeping system, which doesn't need to be something, you don't have to use QuickBooks. You could just use a spreadsheet, but it's got to be some kind of system. You can't just use the LLC's money and the LLC's assets as your own personal slush fund. I've seen this be a huge issue for clients of mine where they didn't realize that they couldn't just take money that's the LLC's money. They couldn't just use the LLC's credit card or debit card to buy groceries. You may think that's okay because there's only one owner. It's not like you're stealing money from the other owners. But how you actually have to do it is you first have to pay yourself a distribution or a salary, which depends upon your tax situation, what's appropriate. And then the money's in your own personal bank account and you use it for your own personal things. You can't commingle. So of course, the big advantage of having an LLC is that it limits your liability. It's called a limited liability company. That's what it does. So what that means is that your LLC, it's like its own little entity, its own little person over here, and it can sign contracts, it can take on debt, it's liable for whatever the business does. Now you have to honor all those corporate formalities for that to work. When you sign a contract, it can't be in your own personal name. It has to be in the name of the LLC, for example. And if you have to co-sign a lease or something like that to guarantee it, then you're still personally liable for that business. The other advantage of forming an LLC is that you have an option on how you're going to be taxed in the United States. An LLC can be taxed just like a sole proprietorship, where it's just passed through on your Schedule C, or you can elect to have it be taxed like a corporation. Now, there are some requirements where certain people and certain entities, certain owners cannot have an S corporation tax status, but there can be advantages where you end up paying less taxes for S corporation or a C corporation, and because you have more deductions and more of the benefits that you pay yourself and your employees are tax deductible. So what's the bottom line? Should you, as a one-owner business, be a sole proprietorship or an LLC? So here's the thing. If you're starting out as a brand new business, you don't really have any personal assets, the business isn't making any money yet, you're the only owner, which we already talked about, and you don't have any employees. Also, the kind of business you're doing is the kind of business that has a ton of risk of getting sued because you're very picky on the clients you take. You have all your clients sign contracts. You have adequate insurance to cover you. You don't do in-person live events where someone could, break their leg or something like that. Then staying a sole proprietorship for the time being may make a lot of sense. But if you have a lot of personal assets, you own a house, you have investments, etc., your spouse is earning a lot of money. If you have employees, so if you have any employees, that introduces a lot of liability, both for the employees not being happy and coming after your business, and also for them doing some bizarre thing where you end up getting sued. And the last issue is if you have a business that just has an inherent amount of risk. There's a lot of people suing people in that industry. Perhaps you may get involved in intellectual property disputes, which is very, very, very expensive to insure. Or you do a lot of live events and someone could break their leg. You can have insurance that covers that, but that only covers you up to a certain limit. One thing to remember is that you can start out as a sole proprietorship and then later convert your business into an LLC. I have a lot of clients who decide to do that because at the beginning they don't even know if this business is going to work. They're not making very much money. It's just them working from home. So, and they're doing, something like consulting and it's not an industry that has a lot of liability. So they start out as a sole proprietorship for the first 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, and then their business takes off. It's making a lot of money. They want to bring in more people, so they convert it to an LLC. On the other hand, I have clients who don't want to have to deal with conversions. They just want to get it all set up the right way at the beginning, and for them, forming an LLC just makes sense. Again, this is Elizabeth Potts Weinstein. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe if you like more tips for small business owners. If you have any questions about LLCs versus sole proprietorships, feel free to go ahead and ask them below, and I'll try to point you in the right direction. Thanks a lot, you guys. Bye-bye.